name of one Creator, one Redeemer, one Sanctifier. Please be seated. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Fully human and fully divine. Jesus was fully human and fully divine. I imagine Jesus on this day in our gospel being tired. Jesus has been traveling, healing the sick, teaching the masses, no longer welcomed in the synagogues, harassed by the Pharisees and the scribes. Jesus is now taking it to the streets. This morning, driving out here, I turned south on Highway 67, and I could see the mountains that seemed to go on forever. My young son over there, who was sitting next to me in the car, asked me, "Did Jesus make the mountains?" I thought for a moment, and I said, "No, son, God made the mountains, and God made everything you see out there. Jesus came down to try to teach us how to live in it." I wonder if Jesus came to visit today, how well he would think we're doing with things. As we struggle with violence, we struggle with racism, we struggle with homelessness. I imagine this morning in our gospel reading, perhaps a hot spring morning, Jesus is tired. I imagine he awakens, he walks alone down to the sea, and he sits down to rest. Perhaps to be alone with his thoughts, or perhaps to pray by the calming water of the sea. Then, such crowds gather around him. You can't blame them. The people of Palestine were tired too. They were tired of conquerors. They were tired of tyranny. They were tired of suffering. And Jesus brought something new. Not religious rules or judgment, not piety. Jesus brought a new message about a new way of loving one another. And the people were thirsty for it. They would follow him anywhere for it. I imagine Jesus drew strength, divine strength, as this crowd gathered around him once again in the morning as he realized he would not rest by the sea. I imagine Jesus summoning a boat as only Jesus could, lifting his hand towards a fisherman, and the fisherman scurrying to hurry to ready the boat for Jesus and gently bringing him out into the sea. I imagine Jesus in the bow of the boat facing the crowd on the shore, perhaps searching for words, perhaps praying for inspiration to address the crowd. And I imagine he sees off to his left, maybe off to his right, a single sower on a beautiful morning, sowing seeds in his field on a hot spring morning. And I imagine all the people can see the sower too. The people of Palestine know the sower's life. They knew the sower's work. "I'm like him," Jesus says. "Just like him. I spread the word. I tell you over and over again, as the sower over there spreads his seeds in the field. Some of his seeds might fall out of the sack or out of his hand and land on the path, and the birds will eat it. This is like those of you hearing my words today who are like the pathway between the rows of the field, hardened by life, undernourished in spirit, and you will not absorb what I'm trying to teach. Some of his seed will fall on rocky ground with shallow soil. These newly planted seeds will wither away in the heat of the sun. This is those of you who will hear what I teach you, and you'll be excited by the possibilities. But then when you're faced with temptation or difficulty in life, you'll forget my teaching and continue along in misery. Some of the sower's seed will fall among thorns, and the plants that those seeds yield will be choked by the weeds. See, the sower has tilled his soil, and he certainly has cleared all the weeds, but the roots of the weeds continue to live beneath the soil and eventually grow and choke the newly planted seed. This is those of you who will hear my teaching but cannot rid yourself of greed, selfishness, lust, or envy, the human weeds, and my words will be choked within you. But the seed that falls on the best ground, the seed which falls on the nourished ground, will yield fruit, bountiful fruit. That's those of you here today who will hear Jesus' teaching, abide by his teaching, cleanse yourself of evil, and continue to care for and nourish your spirit. You will yield bountiful fruit. This is how I imagine the scripture we read today. This is how I imagine a tired, maybe even a frustrated Jesus teaching his lesson from a boat on a hot spring morning. I imagine that same Jesus visiting many parts of our world today, 2,000 years later, and being disappointed and thinking in some ways not much has really changed. I will not give up. We will not give up. I'm strengthened every Sunday when I'm in the presence of congregations of people who gather to listen to Jesus' teaching, to keep their soil rich, free of rocks and free of weeds, so they too can yield bountiful fruit. Let us together yield bountiful fruit as we work together to create the world that Jesus may have imagined